The Interplanetary Academy of Kepler, 186F, stood as a testament to galactic cooperation, its soaring crystalline spires glittering under the light of a distant red dwarf star. As one of the most prestigious educational institutions in this sector of the galaxy, it attracted the brightest minds from dozens of star systems. The biodiversity within its walls was staggering. Students of all shapes, sizes, and evolutionary adaptations moved through the corridors, each bringing unique perspectives and abilities from their homeworlds. I am Kalen, a second-year student at the Academy. My species, the Saurians, evolved on a world of extreme temperature fluctuations, giving us the ability to alter our skin color based on both our emotional state and ambient temperature, a trait my classmates find both fascinating and occasionally amusing. My natural analytical tendencies had guided me toward a specialization in comparative xenobiology, where I could study the endless variations of life throughout our galaxy with detached scientific curiosity. That was until the arrival of Liam O'Connell, our first exchange student from Earth, a planet that had only recently joined the galactic community after decades of observation. Earth was classified as a death world by galactic standards, a planet with environmental conditions so harsh and unpredictable that most spacefaring species would find it utterly uninhabitable. Despite this intimidating classification, the human who walked through our classroom door that first day seemed remarkably unremarkable. Liam appeared almost disappointingly normal. He stood on two legs like many species, had two arms ending in five-digit hands, and was covered in a soft, vulnerable-looking epidermal layer with patches of thin hair. His frame, while proportionally balanced, lacked any obvious natural weapons or defenses. No claws, no protective carapace, no obvious sensory enhancements. Under the Academy's standardized gravity settings, he moved with noticeable effort compared to many of us who evolved in higher gravity environments. "That's the creature from the Death World?" Zorp whispered too loudly beside me, his massive 3-meter frame and thick chitinous armor making his dismissive tone even more pronounced. "It looks like it would snap in a light breeze." Lyra, a Cylon with advanced empathic abilities sitting on my other side, tilted her luminescent head. "Essenza." "Fragility," she murmured. "Physical and psychological vulnerability. How peculiar for a Death World species." Throughout the following weeks, this initial impression only seemed to strengthen. During physical training exercises, Liam struggled with simulated high-gravity environments that several of us navigated with ease. His environmental support system required constant adjustment, as he sometimes experienced mild respiratory difficulties when atmospheric composition shifted too rapidly. His hands fumbled occasionally with our advanced technological interfaces, which he explained were quite different from Earth systems. Even Professor Forlag, our comparative biology instructor, made little effort to hide his professional disappointment. The human specimen displays remarkably few adaptations that would explain their species' survival on such a harsh planetary environment, he announced during one lecture, gesturing toward Liam, who sat stiffly in the front row. Perhaps their primary evolutionary advantage was simply reproductive efficiency rather than individual resilience. I recorded these observations with scientific detachment in my notes, but couldn't help being influenced by the general consensus forming around me. Even while maintaining a cordial relationship with Liam during group projects, I found myself unconsciously adjusting my expectations downward, speaking more slowly, offering more assistance than needed. If he noticed this condescension, he never mentioned it, simply thanking me with a small smile that crinkled the skin around his eyes in a way unique to his species. The turning point came during our hazardous planetary biology practical session, where we were studying the defensive mechanisms of carnivorous flora from xylos. These plants were notorious for their poisonous spines and lightning-quick reflexes, capabilities that had evolved to capture prey on a world where most animals had developed thick protective hides. Our laboratory was equipped with high-grade safety measures, force fields surrounding each specimen, advanced protective gloves, and emergency medical response systems on standby. "Remember," Professor Forlag's voice echoed through the laboratory, These specimens may appear dormant, but they can strike with minimal provocation. The protective fields are calibrated to contain both the specimens and any projected spines or secretions. Do not, under any circumstances, adjust the field parameters. We divided into research teams, with Liam joining my group along with Zorp and Lyra. Our assignment was to analyze the neurotoxin delivery system of a particularly large Xylosian thornwhip, its vine-like appendages coiled tightly behind the protective field. Zorp, always eager to demonstrate his superior knowledge, leaned close to the control panel. "These force field settings are too conservative," he muttered, his mandibles clicking with annoyance. "We'll hardly get any useful readings with the dampening set this high." "The protocol specifically states," I began. "Protocol is for beginners," Zorp interrupted, his massive clawed hand already adjusting the field parameters. "I've handled specimens twice as dangerous as this in my pre-academy training." What happened next occurred in less than 3 seconds. The field flickered momentarily as it recalibrated to Zorp's new settings. The thorn whip, sensing the change, unfurled with explosive force. One of its barbed appendages lashed out through the weakened field, its movement so rapid it was barely visible. There was a collective gasp as students scattered, but one spine found its mark, slashing across Liam's forearm before retracting. The laboratory erupted into chaos. Students were shouting. Professor Forlag was frantically stabilizing the force field while calling for the emergency medical team. And Zorp had backed away, his normally blue carapace turning a pale shade of turquoise with shock. The spine had torn through Liam's protective glove and uniform sleeve, leaving a deep gash that immediately began seeping a bright red fluid. Blood, I realized, though the color was jarring compared to the blue, green, or clear circulatory fluids of most species represented at the Academy. "By the void," Lyra gasped beside me, her empathic abilities likely overwhelmed by the sudden surge of panic in the room. "The toxin, he'll go into systemic shock within minutes." But amid the commotion, Liam himself was strangely calm. He had stepped back from the containment area and was examining his wound with a clinical detachment that seemed entirely inappropriate given the situation. Without a word, he moved to a nearby workstation, sat down, and opened the weathered pack he always carried. "Medical response is 4 minutes out," Professor Forlag announced, his usually composed voice tight with tension. "Human student remains still to slow toxin circulation. Emergency protocol state." "It's fine," Liam interrupted, his voice surprisingly steady. "The cut looks worse than it is." From his pack, he retrieved a small kit unlike our standard medical technology. Instead of the familiar glow of regenerative field emitters or nanogel applicators, his equipment seemed primitively mechanical. Some kind of thread, a curved metal implement, a small bottle of liquid, and what appeared to be simple fabric bandages. "What are you doing?" I asked, moving closer despite my instinct to maintain distance from a potentially contaminated area. Liam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he cleaned the wound with the liquid from the bottle, wincing slightly, but otherwise showing no reaction. Then, to the absolute horror of everyone watching, he threaded the curved metal piece, a needle, I later learned, and without applying any obvious anesthetic, began to methodically push it through his own flesh, pulling the thread through to close the wound. The laboratory fell completely silent. Even Professor Forlag seemed too stunned to speak as we all watched Liam calmly stitch his own torn skin, his face showing only mild concentration, as though he were performing some routine task rather than what appeared to be self-mutilation. Stitch after neat stitch, he closed the gaping wound, occasionally wiping away the red blood with a clean cloth, never pausing or showing signs of the intense pain he must have been experiencing. "Is this?" Lyra finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Normal procedure for humans?" "Basic wilderness first aid," Liam replied without looking up, tying off another stitch. "When you're hiking or camping far from medical facilities, you need to be prepared to handle injuries yourself." He spoke as casually as if discussing classroom notes rather than performing surgery on himself without anesthesia. Zorp's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. But the toxin, xylosian plants produce a neurotoxin that causes paralysis in most species within minutes of exposure. Liam shrugged his uninjured shoulder. Maybe it doesn't affect human physiology the same way. I feel fine, just a bit of local stinging. He completed the final stitch, cut the thread with a small tool from his kit, and began applying some kind of antiseptic solution before wrapping the wound with a bandage. Professor Forlag had approached cautiously and was now examining Liam's handiwork with a scanner. "Remarkable," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "The toxin appears to be breaking down rapidly in your bloodstream. And these primitive sutures, they're surprisingly effective for such a rudimentary technique." The emergency medical team arrived moments later, rushing in with equipment ready only to find their expected emergency patient calmly replacing items in his first aid kit. After a brief examination and application of a more advanced anti-inflammatory agent, they confirmed what seemed impossible. The human had suffered no significant systemic effect from the toxin, and his self-administered treatment, while barbarically manual, was deemed acceptable for preliminary care. As classes resumed the following day, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Where before Liam had been largely ignored or regarded with mild condescension, now he drew curious glances and whispered conversations wherever he went. The incident had transformed him overnight from fragile earthling to something of an enigma. "I still don't understand," Lyra confessed as we gathered for our morning meal in the communal dining hall. "I felt your pain. It was intense, yet you showed almost no reaction. How is that possible?" Liam considered this as he awkwardly manipulated his eating utensils with his bandaged arm. "It's not that humans don't feel pain," he explained. "We feel it quite acutely, actually, but we can compartmentalize it, I guess. Push it aside to deal with more urgent matters." But there was no need, I pointed out. Medical assistance was minutes away. Why subject yourself to unnecessary pain? Habit, maybe. Liam's expression turned thoughtful. On Earth, self-reliance is valued, especially in remote or dangerous situations. And our medical technology isn't as advanced as yours. Sometimes stitching a wound is the difference between survival and... He trailed off, then added with a small smile. "Besides, I've had plenty of practice. Grew up in rural Australia. Lots of opportunities for injuries when you're surrounded by some of the most venomous creatures in our ecosystem." Even Zorp, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the incident, seemed intrigued rather than dismissive. "Your planet truly must be, as harsh as they say, to produce beings who consider such trauma routine." "Earth isn't so bad," Liam laughed. "We just adapted differently. Where some species evolved physical defenses, we developed persistence, I suppose, and creativity in solving problems." Professor Forlag, who had previously regarded Liam as little more than an underwhelming research subject, now invited him to participate in specialized discussions about human adaptive capabilities. In his lectures, the professor's tone had shifted subtly, no longer describing humans as puzzlingly underevolved, but rather contemplating the evolutionary advantages of psychological resilience and problem-solving as alternative survival strategies. Despite this changing perception, some skepticism remained. During one social gathering, I overheard Lyra theorizing to a group of students that what we had witnessed was likely an anomaly, perhaps a biochemical stress response unique to humans that temporarily suppressed pain perception in crisis situations. "It's not sustainable," she insisted. "No species could evolve to regularly endure such trauma without severe psychological consequences. What we witnessed was almost certainly an emergency response, not representative of true resilience." Zorp, still struggling with his role in causing the accident, had developed his own rationalization. "The human's homeworld gravity is only 1 g, he explained loudly to anyone who would listen. Of course, they've developed manual dexterity to compensate for their lack of natural strength. It doesn't mean they're actually adapted for real survival challenges." I found myself in an unusual position. neither fully convinced by these dismissals nor entirely comfortable with the alternative explanation that we had fundamentally misjudged human capabilities. My scientific mind demanded more data before reaching a conclusion. That opportunity came 3 weeks later, when the Academy experienced what would later be classified as a catastrophic systems failure. The official report would blame a rare solar prominence from Kepler, 186F, for generating an electromagnetic surge that overwhelmed the Academy's shielding, but in the moment, all we knew was chaos. It began during mid-cycle, as I was attending an advanced xenobiology lecture with approximately 30 other students, including Liam, Lyra, and Zorp. The first indication of trouble was the lighting system's sudden failure, plunging the amphitheater into darkness before emergency illumination activated with a dim red glow. Then came the distant sound of emergency seals engaging throughout the complex. Remain calm. Our lecturer, Dr. Marixian, instructed as her luminescent tendrils pulsed anxiously. This appears to be a standard containment procedure. Emergency protocols will. Her words were cut short by a deafening alarm, followed by an automated announcement. Critical failure in environmental regulation systems. Radiation shielding compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Life support systems operating at reduced capacity. All personnel proceed to designated emergency shelters. The controlled evacuation quickly deteriorated into near panic when the classroom doors failed to respond to emergency override commands. Dr. Marixian's attempts to contact Central Security through her neural interface were met with distorted feedback that caused her to recoil in pain. "Something's interfering with all integrated systems," she announced, her professional composure visibly strained. Standard communications and navigation aids are non-functional. For most Academy students and faculty, this situation was unprecedented. Our daily lives were thoroughly integrated with advanced technology, from neural interfaces that provided instantaneous information access to environmental systems that automatically adjusted to each species' physiological needs. Without these systems, many found themselves suddenly disoriented and vulnerable. Zorp's powerful exoskeleton offered little advantage in navigating pitch-dark maintenance tunnels. Lyra's empathic abilities were overwhelmed by the collective fear permeating the Academy. Even my own species' adaptability to environmental extremes provided little benefit against potential radiation exposure or oxygen depletion. It was in this moment that Liam's behavior changed subtly but significantly. Where before he had been a respectful presence, often deferring to others' expertise, he now stepped forward with quiet authority. "We need to establish what actually works," he said, his voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. "Electronic systems are compromised, but mechanical systems might still function. Dr. Marixian, are there manual overrides for the door mechanisms?" The professor blinked her compound eyes in surprise, clearly not having considered this option. "Yes. There should be an emergency release panel behind the lectern, but it hasn't been used in decades." Liam located the panel and, with considerable physical effort, managed to activate the mechanical release. The door slid open just enough to create a passage. "We can't stay here," he said, surveying the darkened corridor beyond. "The environmental systems could fail completely. Does anyone know the physical route to the nearest emergency shelter?" The silence that followed was telling. In an age of omnipresent navigation assistance, few had bothered to memorize actual physical pathways through the complex. Even the Academy's emergency protocols assumed functioning neural guidance systems. I studied the structural schematics for a comparative architecture project. I offered, my skin shifting to a troubled orange hue. But that was months ago, and I'm not certain I remember enough details to navigate safely. "That's a start," Liam nodded. "What about auxiliary systems? Are there separate power conduits for emergency life support?" Dr. Marixian hesitated before responding. "Yes, the primary emergency systems run through maintenance conduits marked with phosphorescent trail indicators. They should still be visible even without power, but they're not designed for regular transit. They'll be cramped, possibly hazardous." "Better than waiting here," Liam decided. He quickly organized us into groups, assigning those with night vision or enhanced strength to assist others. From his ever-present pack, he produced a remarkably simple but effective tool, a mechanical light source that required no power integration, just physical movement to generate illumination. As we began our journey through increasingly unfamiliar sections of the Academy, the true extent of the crisis became apparent. The atmospheric regulation was failing in patches, creating pockets of either uncomfortably thin or densely pressurized air. Temperature control had destabilized, with some corridors approaching freezing while others became stiflingly hot. Most concerning were the occasional radiation warnings flashing on the few still functioning emergency displays. Our group of 30 had dwindled to 12 as we encountered other faculty members who directed students to different shelters based on their physiological needs. Now our small band included myself, Liam, Zorp, Lyra, Dr. Marixian, and 7 other students of varying species, all trying to navigate to Emergency Shelter Complex 9, which supposedly remained functional. 6 hours into our ordeal, we faced a critical obstacle. A structural collapse had blocked our planned route, and the only alternative path led through a section showing dangerously elevated radiation levels, not immediately lethal, but potentially harmful with prolonged exposure. "We can't risk it," Dr. Marixian declared. "The biological impact varies too greatly between species. For some of us, even brief exposure could cause permanent damage." "How long will we need to get through that section?" Liam asked, studying the rudimentary map we had pieced together. "Approximately 40 minutes at our current pace," I calculated. "But the radiation levels are—" "I'll go," Liam interrupted. "Human physiology has moderate radiation resistance compared to some of your species. I can scout ahead, find the fastest route, and come back to guide everyone through as quickly as possible." "That's absurd," Zorp protested, though his mandibles were clicking with stress rather than their usual arrogance. "Even if your species has some radiation tolerance, you're still exposing yourself to significant harm." "We're trained for this," Liam replied simply. "Emergency response is part of standard education on Earth. Calculated risk for group survival." Before further objections could be raised, Liam had transferred essential supplies to his pack, taken the most detailed directions we could provide, and disappeared into the hazardous section with his mechanical light and a makeshift radiation shield fashioned from materials we had gathered along our route. The next 52 minutes were excruciating. Lyra repeatedly tried to extend her empathic senses to detect Liam, but reported only distant, indistinct impressions. "He's alive," was all she could confirm with certainty. When Liam finally returned, his appearance was alarming. His skin had taken on a reddish flush, sweat beaded across his forehead, and his breathing was labored. Yet he moved with purpose, immediately sharing what he had discovered. "There's a maintenance crawlway that bypasses the worst radiation," he explained between deep breaths. "It's tight, especially for Zorp, but passable. About 30 minutes through if we move steadily." I marked the path with reflection strips for my emergency kit. "Your physical condition indicates significant radiation exposure," Dr. Marixian observed worriedly. "You require immediate medical intervention." "After we get everyone through," Liam insisted. "The pathway won't stay clear forever if systems continue degrading." What followed was a grueling journey through cramped utility passages never meant for organic transit. Zorp, with his massive exoskeleton, struggled particularly, requiring Liam and myself to physically assist him through narrower sections despite Liam's increasingly obvious distress. Throughout this ordeal, I observed Liam continuously monitoring others' conditions, redistributing water rations, and encouraging those who faltered, all while clearly suffering from radiation sickness himself. When we finally reached Emergency Shelter Complex 9, we discovered approximately 200 students and faculty from various parts of the Academy had already gathered there. The shelter's independent systems were functioning, providing stable life support and radiation protection. Medical personnel immediately took charge of those requiring assistance, with Liam among the first treated for radiation exposure. As recovery and emergency repairs progressed over the following days, the narrative surrounding the crisis began to take shape. Academy officials acknowledged that the established emergency protocols had proven inadequate precisely because they relied too heavily on integrated technologies. Many groups had become disoriented or paralyzed by indecision when their neural interfaces and environmental supports failed. Our group's successful journey through particularly hazardous sections became something of a case study. During the official debriefing, Dr. Marixian didn't hesitate to attribute our survival primarily to Liam's leadership and practical skills. The human student demonstrated crisis management capabilities that our curriculum has clearly overlooked, she stated. While our education focuses on technological solutions and species-specific advantages, we have neglected the fundamental principles of adaptation and practical problem-solving that appear central to human crisis response. Even Professor Forlag, who had initially dismissed human evolutionary strategies as unremarkable, now expressed revised views. The human capacity for what they term improvisation deserves serious academic consideration, he acknowledged during a faculty symposium I was permitted to observe. Their biological systems appear optimized not for specialized environments, but for generalized response to unpredictable challenges, a different but equally valid evolutionary approach. Most striking was the transformation in my fellow students' attitudes. Zorp, whose massive physical strength had proven less valuable than expected during the crisis, approached Liam during a communal meal period after we had all sufficiently recovered. "I misjudged your species," he stated with the blunt directness characteristic of his kind. "I equated physical vulnerability with overall weakness." This was incorrect. Lyra's perspective had shifted in a different but equally profound way. "I finally understand what I was sensing in you," she told Liam as several of us gathered in the recreational area. "What I interpreted as fragility was actually elasticity. You bend under pressure, but rarely break. You accept pain as information rather than allowing it to become debilitating. It's a form of strength I had never conceptualized before. As for myself, this experience fundamentally altered my understanding of evolutionary success. My scientific training had always emphasized specialized adaptations, the perfect solution for a specific environmental challenge. Humans represented something different. Adaptability itself as a primary survival strategy, the capacity to endure suboptimal conditions through psychological resilience and creative problem-solving rather than biological specialization. In the following academic cycles, the Academy implemented curriculum changes that reflected this new understanding. Practical crisis response became a required course for all students, taught jointly by faculty from various disciplines and occasionally featuring transmissions from Earth specialists. The emergency systems underwent comprehensive redesign to incorporate redundant mechanical backups alongside the advanced technological solutions. Liam completed his exchange program and returned to Earth, but his impact remained. 2 additional human students arrived the following cycle, greeted with curious respect rather than condescension. More importantly, the conceptual framework through which we understood different species' capabilities had been permanently expanded. Strength, we learned, manifests in countless forms across the galaxy. Some species evolved impenetrable defenses, others developed spectacular sensory capabilities or technological integration. Humans reminded us of something equally valuable but easy to overlook: the quiet strength of endurance, the power of remaining functional under duress, and the ability to confront the unexpected with adaptability rather than specialization. As I complete my studies and prepare to join the Academy's research division, I often reflect on that first moment in the laboratory, watching Liam calmly stitch his own wound while we all stood frozen in shock. What appeared initially as a barbaric necessity of an underdeveloped world revealed itself ultimately as a powerful metaphor for human resilience. They heal themselves, they solve problems with whatever tools are available, and they keep moving forward despite pain or hardship. In a galaxy filled with wonders, this peculiar strength might be one of the most valuable contributions humanity brings to our interstellar community. Not the ability to avoid wounds, but the capacity to stitch yourself back together and continue onward, bringing others along with you through the darkness.